para explicar-vos porque é esta keynote diferente. Eu e o professor Ivor Goodson conversámos sobre como fazer esta apresentação e discutimos que provavelmente o melhor seria em termos de conversa ou de entrevista, porque as perguntas que eu lhe farei, o trabalho dele é muito vasto e, portanto, as perguntas que eu lhe farei vão ao encontro também da temática e daquilo que vamos trabalhar, ou que temos trabalhado no projeto e que podemos trabalhar nestes 2 dias. E, portanto, decidimos que este era o melhor modelo para fazer este momento. So, Ivor, once again, thank you very much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you here. Ivor is our friend since 2009, I think, 2010, in a project called REIPE that we coordinated for 3 years. And he was one of the participants, one of the members of that project. And since then, we have been in contact. He also have been here in Lusófona giving classes for the PhD, I think in 2011, wasn't it? Yes. And so I'm just going to present you for those who do not know you. So he's a notable and influential British educator with a PhD in philosophy from the University of Sussex. He has worked in various different universities in England, Canada, and the United States. He held visiting professor positions in several countries, also in Max Planck Institute in Berlin, Sciences Po Institut de l'Étude Politique in Paris, and Stanford University at the United States. As a professor of learning theory at the Education Research Center of the University of Brighton, he has led major research projects. He is the author of an extensive and multifaceted body of scientific work in curriculum studies, narrative theory, and education policy. Ivor Goodson was awarded with John Nisbet Fellowship in 2018 by the British Educational Research Association in recognition of his exceptional contribution to education research and its application to improving practice and benefiting public. In 2020, he was honored with the Festschrift, I think it's like this, recently named a Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences and received the Michael Huberman Award from the American Educational Research Association for his work on teachers' lives, an honorary doctorate from the University of Gothenburg, and the title of Laureate of the Phi Delta Kappan Society in the United States. So it's a huge curriculum, and I'm not going to say, I'm going to stop here, and we will start our talk and our conversation. So in the book Storing the Public Intellectual, it brings together insights. This book brings insights from scholars worldwide who have engaged with your work and comprehensively examines your contributions to educational research, your role as a public intellectual. What is the central theme or purpose that connects all of your research? What do you consider as, I think, yes, try it.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Difficult question to start with. You know. I suppose the thing that connects it really is an attempt to do work that allows people, ordinary teachers, ordinary citizens, to understand the purposes of governments and government policy. So underpinning it is essentially a commitment to democracy and a commitment to a population that understands what governments are trying to do for them and to them. And to do that, you have to develop styles of research which involve the people that you're trying to help. Very often, research methods are constructed in the purposes of the people in power to not necessarily empower the population. And the counter movements, of which I guess that's the theme, would try and find ways of studying which allow people to engage with policy, practice, and everything else in a way that's informed. So I suppose the thing that drives it is an attempt to create a reasonable flow of information for ordinary people so as they can interrogate government purposes in a serious way, rather than just take what social media tells them and buy it. This way you look at what social media or other people tell you and you interrogate it for yourself and you say, either this makes sense or it doesn't make sense. But to do that, you have to have information from researchers and others that help you. So I guess that's the thing.
How has your perspective on education and curriculum evolved over the years?
Yeah, again, that's a good question. I mean, I started out as a school teacher. I mean, actually, I started out as a university professor and left the university. Yes.
Your mic.
Oh,
no, it's okay. You have to put it a little bit.
Have to put it to my mouth.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I started out as a university professor and I didn't like it. And I went back to become a school teacher. And that was a very interesting move to do. And since then, I became involved in trying to understand why the school curriculum was as it was when it didn't seem to work very well for the people that I cared about the most. I came from a very poor family. Poor kids in general hated the curriculum. They found it, but I mean, in England, it was Latin, Greek, all sorts of ridiculous things that just bored you to death and bored everybody, which I think was the point, and bored us all to death. So we were all badly behaved at school. I hated school, left school at 15 to work in a factory. And I realized that the curriculum was constructed in a way to make that happen. So I wanted to look at that battle over curriculum, and I did a number of books. I was telling my friend over here, the first book was looking at how environmental studies, which was a good subject, which the kids were interested in, was squeezed out of the curriculum by the geographers and the biologists, so as it couldn't exist. And I found that a really interesting struggle to study. And at that time, you could interrogate government policy in interesting ways. You could get in, you could cross-question the politicians, as I did. You could cross-question everybody. So you could actually get inside the struggle over curriculum. But increasingly, governments took that possibility away. They simply pronounced the policy, the teachers obeyed, and it was a straight transmission model from power down to the classroom. So the struggle over curriculum couldn't be interrogated in the way I wanted. So I was left with a problem. This would be around 1990. So I just left England because I hated what we had a woman called Margaret Thatcher, which you're all too young to remember, but she was an appalling human being. And she was doing terrible things to the country. So my wife said, you don't like it, you're not happy, I'm not happy, let's go somewhere else. So we went to work in Canada, which is very cold, I have to tell you, and worked in Canada for 10 years. And during that time, I realized that that kind of curriculum policy study was essentially dead because governments had cut out any chance of you interrogating it. So I started to think, what kind of work could you do which brings the teachers back in an engaged way, which celebrates the teacher's expertise and allows you to interrogate policy from a different space. So at the time in Canada, the head of the teachers union there had a workshop for 2 weeks and invited me up. And at the end of it, somebody asked me a question in the audience, and it was the chief of the whole union. And he said, if there was one policy which you would suggest the union pushes the government for, what would it be? And I said, I think what I would suggest is that you you pressure the government to give teachers 1 day a week preparation time, where they can prepare the materials, they can think about why they're teachers, they can understand their sense of mission, they can get back in touch with themselves. And the result will be they'll be more motivated, you'll retain better teachers, and the grades in schools will go up. And that's exactly what happened in Ontario. The unions threatened strike action to get teacher preparation time, and the teachers got their 1 day a week, which they've still got. Now, I began to think more about that. Hey, this is a long answer to a short question, isn't it? We'll only get through 2 questions, but anyway. What I realized was that you had to have that time for teachers to think about their lives, to think about why they came into teaching. By and large, teachers are a really good bunch of people. You know, they're in it for good reasons, by and large, is my experience. And so if you study teachers' lives and teachers' work, you begin to see from a very interesting position what government policies actually mean in the classroom. So if a policy comes in, which is, I mean, by now I'm working, there's a life history of me in the middle of all this. So by now I've moved. My wife, who wanted to go to Canada, hated it. So the whole time we were there, she was saying, let's go home to England. And my son was the same. He hated it too. So in the end, I got a job back in England in 1995. I have to tell you this because it's part of the story. And I'd been offered a really prestigious professorship in New York State, in the University of Rochester. So I said to Mary, actually, we're not going back to England. I've got this fabulous job in America. She said, I'm not going. She said, I'm not going. So I said, all right, well, I think I've already dragged you to Canada, so you go home to England. And I had a sabbatical then in England, and the English universities, University of East Anglia, said, why don't, your wife doesn't want to go to America, you don't want to go to America, why don't you have 6 months in America and 6 months in England? And Mary can live in England, and you can pop off to New York State, you know, for 6 months. It's actually a stupid thing to do because, you know, you've got 2 houses, 2 wives, you know, you've got, it's just an impossible situation. And 2 tax situations. It was absolutely silly thing to do. But anyhow, I did that for 10 years. And while I was there, I realized that they were putting through some very interesting, you'll see where I'm going in a minute if you're staying with me. They were putting through these fascinating reforms in America. Clinton was the president, and it was called Education 2000. And I think I said yesterday to the group that were there, they were spending over £2 billion on these reforms. And the teachers weren't changing at all. They didn't like the reforms. And they simply resisted them. So you pour out £2 billion for a reform, nothing changes. And Americans are used to things changing when you pay money, you know, Trumpian view, you know, you get a deal, you pay. But they weren't getting it. So in desperation, they came to me and another guy called Andy Hargreaves and said, look, we're spending all this money. If we gave you a couple of $1 million, you know, what would you study? And my first thought was, well, I don't care what I study. I'll have the $2 million and I'll tell you later. But actually, what we decided to do was to interrogate the reforms that were there and the changes to the curriculum that the government wanted, and set that against teachers' life history of their practices and teachers' responses to the reform. And then we did a series of life histories of the teachers. And what was most crucial was that in America, the best teachers are given prizes. So you could actually work out who the best teachers were. These are prizes that the kids have said, these are good teachers. So what I decided to do was interview a lot of the prize-winning teachers about the reforms. And we had a set of chapters on each of those teachers. And all of the best teachers hated the reforms. So half of the best prize-winning teachers that we interviewed were leaving teaching because of the reforms. Now that's quite a powerful political message to take back to the senators and others in the Congress in the US, because what they were then suffering from was a lot of pressure from the people in the voters about the way that schools were deteriorating. The voters had noticed that the best teachers were leaving. And what it did, of course, was transform the reform process. And what it shows you is, long answer to a question, what it shows you is if you study teachers' lives and you study the way that teachers are responding to a reform, you can interrogate the policies in a way that the government has to listen to. So to answer Elsa's question an hour ago, I moved from studying curriculum where the government had frozen you out of the possibility of challenging their policies to a place where you could change their policies, which was teachers' life and work. And I've stayed in that area pretty much ever since and broadened it into studies of narrative more generally, because, well, we'll get to that later. But that's the long answer to a short question.
We have time, so don't worry. So regarding the life history and the narrative methods that you developed in your research and that you talked about now, what are the unique insights that you can say that these approaches provide that are not provided by more traditional methods in research?
I think the thing about...
The micro.
Hello. The thing about life history work is that it is concentrated on the subjectivity of people, how people experience the world. If you think about it, no other research method really does that in that way. You could have surveys which do it in a numerical way. You could have psychological studies which tell you what the person's thinking without asking them. You could have philosophical studies, but there's no method that I know that actually says, I'm going to talk to you and I'm going to listen and I'm going to shut up and listen while you tell me how you're experiencing the world and what you want from the world. And I can't think of any other method that I would want that does that. I mean, the whole point, I think, of being a researcher is not for me to have a whole set of my own theories that I polish. It's to have a set of studies of other people talking about themselves with me interrogating them about it so that we begin to understand people's subjectivity. This is very much the age of subjectivity. Social media is about people's opinions and subjectivities. But the research methods which are preferred by governments and by corporations focus only on objectivity. And so a research method which focuses and disentangles people's subjectivities is, I think, a very good way to go, Elsa.
So how do you say that personal and collective stories shape the way curriculum is designed and experienced? How do you say? Can you give us an example also?
I mean, I think it's the same thing. If you get inside the school and you talk, not just to teachers, by the way, I do a lot of work with headmasters. I mean, there's a big leadership thing going on at the moment. And the idea of that was that the leaders would tell the teachers what to do. But what you find again, when you talk to the leaders of schools and you begin to see which leaders are good and have the support of the teachers and the children and the parents. It's teachers, it's head teachers who can create a good narrative of the school and share that story of the school right down. So far from leadership being about power and control, I would say what we need is an understanding of what I call narrative leadership. How a good headmistress or headmaster creates a story for the school that everybody delivering inside the school buys into. Those are good schools, where the people understand where the school's going, whose side they're on, why they're doing it this way. Bad schools are where people come in and say, we will do this. This is the way we will do it. And we will have iron discipline. Everybody will obey. It looks good. It looks military. It looks efficient. It's a disaster. So you go back to the same position you got with Clinton's reforms, that they think the way is to instruct people into obedience. That's fatal in education, because people just check out. The teachers check out, above all, the students check out, and then the parents get angry. So I think that's why this method, in the end, this method works well, even in terms of those people that want to control the system for other purposes. It's a method which allows you to understand the motivation of teachers and students in different ways.
And how do you see that this method can work to those who want to be controlled, as you saw in your narrativity characters?
I think that's the nub of the problem, and that's the nub of the problem if you look at Trump's America. The new digital age, and people here are already looking at their phones, the new digital age transforms the way that people can be controlled. And so, I mean, take an example of American politics, where Trump, who's not all bad, but some of it's bad stuff, is pumping out all of these fictions about immigrants and stuff that we know is not factual. But it doesn't sound, does it, as if factual challenges work. If you say to him, you haven't built a wall, you're never going to build a wall. That doesn't work, because people want to believe he's going to build a wall. So the only place where you're in this game, you're always looking for a place from which you can interrogate that which you don't agree with. The place where you can interrogate the kind of lies which a lot of right-wing populists, I mean, Bolsonaro in Brazil, a classic liar and monster. How would you challenge the lies that he put out? The only place I think you can go is to challenge it at the level of the narratives that they're promoting. So you need an educational system which allows people to understand that when something comes in on a troll, on a social media thing, your response is not to say, this is true, we'll build a wall. Your response is to say, hang on a minute, let me think about that. Does that work? How do I interrogate the narrative that's being pushed at me? And that becomes very important in the world in which we live at the moment.
So going a little bit back when you talked about leadership and regarding the teacher's professionalism, how do you think that what can be the role that professional autonomy plays in improving teachers' well-being, and how can school leaders foster it without undermining institutional goals? How can this be balanced?
I mean, there's a prior question to that, which you hinted at earlier, which is part of this project that we're here for is understanding professional autonomy, which means teachers' capacity to make their own decisions.
So my question is, societies are always built in fictions. Religion and churches are good examples. What is the difference for our times, where it's not churches that create the fictions, but the social media?
Well, I think one difference is the monopolization of people's time. I mean, you know, the amount, I mean, if you look at the figures on the amount of time people take on a screen, either a computer screen or a mobile phone, it's astonishing. You'll be surprised how many hours a day you're on it. So, and that's a totalizing experience. Whereas before, you had all sorts of different bits to your life. Maybe you went to church on Sunday, but that was it. You did that bit, you put it away. So it's the totalizing experience of social media and digitalization, which is alarming. And I think it saturates consciousness of people in ways that I don't think anything has ever done before. So it's the total attention that's given to it that's the difference historically.
Okay.
Question number 2.
Do you know that in certain religions you must 5 times per day pray to and that was also common in the Catholic and the Occidental Church. So
that's 5 times a day, but you think how often people go to their screen? Or
5 to 10 hours.
It's
but
5,000 times a day.
Yeah. Okay.
It's different. It's more total.
Now, the second question. You stated that the automation of human beings as the ultimate goal of the digital revolution. And you go to the Zuboff and the surveillance capitalism. But you know that there are criticism to the thesis of Zuboff. And do you know that the Google motto was "Don't be evil," now is "Do the right thing." My question is that in a certain way, this type of automation could be also happen with the books, TVs, and all the media before. So it's that just a characteristic of our times, or this automation was tried by the centuries since the dawn of time?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think the degree of automation from reading a book is evidently different from the degree of automation that we now have with digitalization. I just think it's much more invasive and intensive than the automation that comes from reading a book. But I could be wrong.
But you know that after reading a book, there were hundreds of wars. After reading a book, there were wars in Europe because of the date of the Easter. In the 14th century, there were wars because the people wanted Easter on this day of the year, and those wanted, well, that was not the true reason, but that was the official reason. So at least since, as far as I know, since the digitalization, we didn't have wars about the crazy guy that is trying to buy Greenland, or we hope that he will not invade, but that's happened before. Why are we so afraid now?
Well, I think we're afraid now because of the evidence. You talk about wars, but there are wars everywhere in the world at the moment, and often fought digitally, which makes it easier. You just collateralize the damage. You don't see it. It's done digitally, you take the IDF, they're doing all of that by just computer
Yeah.
screen. That's different from a fought war where there's blood and gore and you don't repeat it the next time. So even the nature of warfare is changed by digitalization. And it's, you know, if you look at the world now, there are an astonishing number of conflicts going on. You know, it's not just Israel, Ukraine, it's Sudan, it's Myanmar, it's just everywhere. So that's why people are fearful. And why?
My last comment, it's about transactional knowledge versus transformative knowledge. Why not think about transactional interactions, where the goal is human empowerment, happiness, love, and collaboration? You can use that word also.
No, I think transactional interrogation would be a way forward, but it would be transformative.
Is it just a game of words, or
No,
why not use the words of the adversary, of the enemy, to take the word from that meaning and give that another meaning?
Sure. I'll have a think about that.
Thank you. I was thinking about this transactional knowledge, transactional relationship, transactional society. Do you think that there is a way to go back? Do you believe that we can move back? Or is something that will get worse?
It's a good question. I don't think we can ever go back, unfortunately. I mean, it just doesn't happen. We have to go forward, but we may learn things from before. So really the question would be, what of the things that we valued before the market can we now reinstate, reinvigorate, rehabilitate in the market situation? So in a way, one's going back for inspiration. That I think is possible. I think people are aware of loss. They know in a very profound way that a lot of the way the world worked before this was nicer and warmer. It's not to give a golden age analysis of the world before markets. Nothing was perfect then, but humanity was, I think, more generally in a better place in the post-war period than it is now. I think that's evidentially true. One of the reasons it was in a better place is that the world had been blown up by all these impulses in 1945, and for 30 years, every society tried to rebuild in a more humane, social democratic way. We're coming to the end of that now. Humanity's back in a Holocaust moment. You can see that there's genocide in various countries. We're back in 1933, if you want to go back and make an analogy. And the question is, how could we have avoided what happened in 1933, where populist strongmen took over in country after country? That's happening now in country after country. How come, and the same thing happened then, the League of Nations was ignored, now it's the United Nations that's being ignored. And who's ignoring it? The Americans and the Israelis are saying, we're not interested in the International Criminal Court, we're not interested in that. So, to answer your question, really, I think there's plenty of inspiration from before the market that we can draw on, but you can't go back. You have to go forward and find new ways to fight against fear and hatred. And it's a tough ask at the moment. A lot of the powers that are out there are promoting fear and hate. And of course, to go back to capitalism, why? Because wars are a multi-trillion business. There's a fortune to be made every time a country goes to war. And if you remember, in 1933, all of the main companies in Germany met with Hitler on January the 11th, 1933, to agree to promote him so as there wouldn't be any kind of union power. And all of those armaments people made a fortune as the Second World War came. but it wasn't in the interests of people. So there's a dark story here that you have to also engage with. I mean, one of the problems of human well-being and keeping yourself happy is that you have to develop also, as well as a theory of happiness, a theory of evil, which is that people can be led down bad paths by bad people. That's the simple truth. I remember listening to this English playwright on American television. There's a thing called the David Letterman Show, where you have all this chat. And they made the mistake of having this serious English playwright in David Hare, and he said what he wanted to hear was how much everybody enjoyed being in America. So I said, yeah, I love being in New York, fabulous place. And Americans, oh, lovely people. Is there anything that you're missing in America? He said, yeah. He said, the problem with you all is you don't have any theory of evil. You don't understand the bad side of people. Well, you have to understand both. And you need a theory of well-being, but also a theory of evil, which understands people can go down dark paths. How do we stop it? Yeah. Cheerful bloke, aren't I? Are you happy? Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Ivor, for your very interesting talk. I would like to back a little bit about the narratives, the power of narrative for us as human beings. We organize our way to live and to understand the world. Our brain organize the world according to the power of narrative. We know who we are, where we do. We construct our notion of time, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, because the narrative is deeply integrated in our way of working, in the way our mind works. And my question is, until now, the narratives were constructed by human beings, but now this is not true, not 100% truly. Who is creating the narratives? And as our brain is so good in believing and following narratives, what will be our future now that when the narratives are not created by humans? And how can we react to this?
Big question, isn't it? You got any answers? Well, I mean, the first thing I'd say, the way you described how you construct your narrative is not the way many people do construct their narrative. So you have to go back to basics and say people have different narrative characters. So some of us try to create our own narrative and then go and live it. But other people prefer to have a narrative given to them. And what I'm really saying here is that the times in which we live tend to favor the second group, because narratives are being produced endlessly. And you ask me who's creating the narratives for many people. Elon Musk is creating the narratives for many people. It's a specific person who's promoting a particular vision in country after country. He hates the English because they've got a more social democratic system, so he's trying to destabilize the government. And he's got his own narrative to do that. So, I mean, the real point about narrative control is that if the control of narratives is largely digitalized, it hands control to about 5 or 6 tech entrepreneurs in California. We can name them, can't we? Bezos, Musk, Zuckerberg. They control vast amounts of narrative capacity. Behind the fear of where the narratives are going is the inequality of narrative control. That's deeply concerning. And it goes back to your point, and the whole point of this is, how does an individual create their own narrative and live by it? There's another book by Richard Sennett called The Corrosion of Character, and he says the one thing that this mode of control cannot fully kill off is the endless human search for the meaning of life. It goes back to the religious point here. If you think about it, they have not been able to kill off the search for the meaning of life. Everybody is trying to find an answer to that still. And Elon Musk doesn't have the answer. Donald Trump doesn't have the answer. It may have a fleeting, but in the deep crevices of our being, we still want to know what's the meaning of life. And that's the most hopeful area. If you think about it, most of our lives are now colonized by markets. But the internal landscape of our narratives cannot be penetrated easily. It's a little bit like 1984, if you've ever read the book. There's a guy in there, Winston Smith, who's still got his story going on and still remembers the time before Big Brother took over and still has his own narrative that he's working to. And he's the last man on earth with it, or he's got a woman he lives with. That's a little bit where we are. But the capacity to penetrate our search for the meaning of life, that's beyond them at the moment. And I think it will be for a long time. And it's from there that the counter-reaction will come. That's why narrative work's so important. Did I? Yeah.
Yes, so, anyone else? No? Oh, Susanna. The last question.
Last question, come on.
Hi.
Deliver the killer blow. Go on, go.
So I'm building a methodology for narratives I'm trying to build. And I'm interested in narratives with teachers. And I would like to ask you, considering that we had our revolution for freedom 50 years ago, and teachers were used to be told what to do, and now we are starting to be told what to do again, how can we free ourselves from that?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's what I was saying. I think the only way we can do it is to sponsor the more autonomous professional groups, which are often, as I said before, the best teachers and the best leaders, and to use those as a kind of shock troop to take over the schools in a more general way. So if those groups ran mentoring courses, or if they ran teacher development, professional development courses, which focused on narratives and teachers' sense of mission, that would take a lot of it back. A lot of it is thinking about what professional development courses, teacher training courses could do to promote this kind of what I call narrative learning, where teachers get back in touch with why they went into it, what they want to achieve, and which teachers seem to them to have the most freedom and the most creativity. I mean, I'll give you one other example, which is a kind of an answer. I was in Shanghai, and you often get this. My wife and I were invited to dinner with the Chinese Minister of Entrepreneuriality, a pretty important post in the Chinese government. And you know, the Chinese meals, you sit on a big round table, and Mary was on his left hand and I was on his right hand. And he spent the evening chatting away to Mary. He was really enjoying the food. And then at the end of it, he turned to me, and I couldn't work out why I'd been invited to Shanghai in the first place. He said, "I have a question for you," he said. "China has gone through its first phase of building the infrastructure around the world. We've built railways and we've built, docks all over the world, including Africa. But we can't go on making a profit now. We need to move into a second stage. And that second stage is creativity. It's how do we make our population creative? And what we're planning to do is to create a lot of creative autonomous curriculum initiatives which will sponsor autonomy, because that's the only. Now that's an interesting thing to think about, is that a country there which is already outperforming America by yards is beginning to realize that if you just go for dull conformity and obedience, you don't win the creative game. You get screwed. And you can see in American business, apart from the digital thing, they have nothing going on. Whereas, well, I think you'll see it. Well, I mean, we could go in at length, but that for me was quite hopeful in terms of sponsoring autonomy more generally. Yeah.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
I think we will keep on talking with Ivor for today, but we have to finish now. Thank you very much for your questions and for being here. I just want to give you what we say in Spanish, recuerdo from the university. Okay? Yes, yes. It's something for you.
Oh, that's lovely. Thanks.
Yes. And then